There it is. Okay, hello. How are we doing? Thumbs up. That's good. So I'm excited because today's our first day of 4 weeks of kind of walking through the major structure of the vertebrate family tree, the vertebrate phylogeny. As we walk through, you guys will get major anatomical features, synapomorphies, characters that unite the different clades of vertebrates and help us understand their evolutionary relationships. But another angle on this whole chunk of class is hopefully to expose you to some organisms, some vertebrates that you maybe haven't seen before, or ones that are familiar to you that you'll learn new things about. All of this kind of with in mind the idea that at the end of the class, you guys are going to have presentations that you'll give on subjects of your choosing. And so I know I've said this to you before, but I really like this class as an excuse to expose you to a lot of really cool animals. Does anybody know this? I mean, there's a bunch of fishes up there, but only one's really obvious. Do I know what that is or heard about it before? That's a photo. It's touched up a little bit, but it is a photo. A thresher shark, that is a thresher shark. Do you know anything about thresher sharks? They got big long tails. Yeah, that's the cool things. They hit fish with them. There's only a couple of videos you can find on YouTube of like footage of them hunting because they're pretty secretive and they're loners. They also have always hilarious faces with that like mouth and like the big eyes, but they'll swim into a school of fish really fast, stop with their pectoral fins, and then whip their tail into the fish. And they'll like the shock wave and the actual impact will like not. So you'll have a few, you know, whatever herrings or something be like, and then the shark goes and eats them all up. So it's a crazy thing. And so it's an extreme adaptation. There's also a remora, this little fish right here, or a shark suckerfish, a wrasse, so a little coral reef fish up there. And there's also this kind of fish, which is a person with a air tank on. We'll talk about that later. So there's some fishes and we're going to get into it today. So where we left off lecture last Thursday is we had just kind of gotten up towards vertebrates. We still weren't quite there. I didn't close the gap. And so here's where we were with our more closely related to us than to other bilaterian groups. So we are in this clade of bilaterians called deuterostomes. That includes things like starfish and sea urchins. And then things in our phylum, which is chordata, like cephalochordates and tunicates, which we're going to talk about today. There are two characters that I gave you guys, two synapomorphies for deuterostomia. Talk to your neighbors for a second. You remember what those are? All right, what are our deuterostome characters? Yes. Deuterostomy. Diploblasty is 2 tissue layers. So you and a jellyfish are both diploblasts, but it starts with a D, and it is about development. Yeah, so deuterostomia, second mouth. The mouth forms second. That means when you're a ball of 8 cells and it starts to form and do, oh my God, what's the word? Blastopore? See, this is why I don't remember these things. But the first hole that forms in us is what will eventually become the anus, whereas in all the other bilaterians, the protostomes, that hole becomes the mouth. And then what's the other one? Yeah, these pharyngeal gill slits. So on a pharynx in the throat area, what we call the throat, not all these animals have something you call a throat, but not just like the presence of gills, it's the slits. There's a lot of weird stuff a lot of these animals do. This acorn worm has these gill openings. We're going to talk about gill slits. So those are the two characters for deuterostomes. Great. And then right at the end of class on Thursday, you guys got 3 synapomorphies, 3 characters that unite the monophyletic clade chordata, which is of course our phylum. So chordata is an old word in biology. And so I gave you those right at the end. We're going to go over them again. Here's a picture of one of the non-vertebrate chordates, cephalochordate. This is a not very diverse group of animals alive today, mostly in this genus called Amphioxus or lance slits. There's some anatomy there for them, but they can show us a bunch of the characters that unite all chordates. And the 3 I care you know about are, you got these on Thursday, the notochord, which is a collagen-bound rod. It's very stiff. You can flex your muscles against it and it'll spring back, so it helps with locomotion and support. A dorsal hollow nerve cord. So you'll remember that like a central nervous system with neurons and things like that unites all bilaterians. So like a grasshopper and a spider have nerves in their body. But a dorsal hollow nerve cord, something that lays above the notochord, which is structural, and is of course homologous with your spinal cord and the front of it with your brain, is a chordate character. And then lastly, the character I gave you for chordates was the post-anal tail. We can call it if you want, I'm fine with this. There's technical differences, but who cares? For our class, the caudal fin, the tail fin. So post-anal is behind the anus. There's a fin. This is a tail fin used for locomotion. Those three snapomorphies unite all the chordates, even the ones that aren't vertebrates. And of course, vertebrates inherit all of those characters. So I just want to make a point to you guys about a couple of them. So the notochord in you probably don't think of yourself as having a notochord, a bound collagenous rod that goes up and down your back. So here's a vertebrate. This is actually one of us. It's a vertebrate. This is a lamprey. We're going to learn about lampreys today if you don't know lampreys. So they're these jawless vertebrates. And so this is a little bit of the cartilaginous cartilage structure of a lamprey's front skeleton. So we're going to learn about this. This is where the mouth is. This is where the brain is. This is a gill basket, very different from the gills we're going to talk about later. But right there, that rod thing is the notochord in a lamprey. And so you can see on top of the notochord, there's these little yellow-like things. In lamprey, those are cartilaginous, and they are probably, it's funny that it's difficult to know this for sure, but they're probably homologous with like the neural arches, the little spiky parts of your vertebrae, sitting on top of the notochord. But they don't wrap all the way around, they don't touch each other, they're just there. We're going to get into what lampreys are and why they're weird. But so that notochord there exists in this lamprey, and in animals with jaws, we have vertebral centra, so the round disky part of your vertebra. So you've got these things. Individual vertebrae have this round part that looks like a spool of thread. The centrum of your vertebra, that's made of bone. And so in us, in mammals like us, and certainly in you humans, the only vestige of the notochord, the true chordate ancestral notochord that you all have in your bodies right now, is that between each of your vertebral centra, you have a disc. You might hear somebody slipping a disc. There's a lot of structures in that disc, but this center gooey part of your vertebral disc called the nucleus pulposus, and that's a medicine word. That's not like a vertebrate anatomy word. The nucleus pulposus is developmentally the notochord. So when you all were embryos, you had a notochord for a hot second, and then it all became bone. But in between each vertebra, there's a little of jelly things, and that is the ancestral notochord. So if you're a medical person or a PA or a nurse kind of on your track, the nucleus pulposus, tell your patients someday about how that's their ancestral chordate notochord. Also, I just like can't stand medicine because like they figure the vertebrae upside down because like that's how they talk about it. I'm just like, oh, terrible. Okay. Let's talk a little bit about the invertebrate chordates, which I think is such a fun thing. So chordata has 3 clades in it: cephalochordates, tunicates, and vertebrates. So technically there are 2 clades of chordates that aren't vertebrates. The first one I'll tell you about just really briefly is this one, cephalochordates. So the lancelet in the genus Amphioxus, you might have heard, it's a study organism, a model organism for some scientists. And so it's just a pretty simple little animal. They're all about this big. I'm going to show you some in lab next week. They swim around in fresh water. They're not that hard to find if you know where to look for them. What they usually do though is scoot their butts down into the sand and then use these little things to filter feed through their pharynx. And so they're filter feeders usually, sitting there in the bottom. They have their notochord, they have the dorsal wall nerve cord, they have all these other things. But this is a living animal that like, it's so cool that this animal is alive because it is its own evolving living thing. But it helps us understand possible ideas about what the ecology, the diversity of early chordates might have been like 500 million years ago, back in the Cambrian, something like this. I think the much better clade, and that's a real hard judgment on my part, the much better clade of invertebrate chordates are the tunicates. So tunicates are also called salps. You guys might have heard the word salp. They are, if you're ever a snorkel person or a scuba person, you might see them. As adults, they just look like sacks of jelly that filter feed. They almost look like sponges, which are the most primitive animals possible. But they're not. They have a very clean in and out siphon. They bring water down into their bodies. They have a very developed pharynx as adults with a stomach at the bottom. And then there's an excurrent where they pump water out. They filter feed. The thing that's crazy about tunicates is when they are babies, when they disperse after they hatch, this is what they look like. They look like little tadpoles. They have a notochord, they have a dorsal hollow nerve cord, they have the pharyngeal gill slits, they can swim. They look like little fishy things. And then they slam their face into the rock, lose their tail, and become jelly sacks that filter feed for their adult life. It's fantastic. And so tunicates are great because this is something you can go ahead and Google it. You'll see Darwin on the Beagle, like skimming the ocean, and they'll catch them. And so back in the 1830s, people know about tunicates as like, they're kind of like us, but they're weird. And so a long time, the juveniles, the infants of animals like tunicates were like their own idea. People knew tunicates and people knew these baby things and they had their own name because no one thought they were the same organism. So tunicates, you know, a big adult tunicate looks like that. There's actually a lot of diversity of tunicates though. Not all of them fuse their faces to the bottom. Some of them join together into colonies. Some of the biggest ones are called pyrosomes. There is a giant colony of pyrosomes that floats in the open ocean. It is not ever stuck to the bottom. That's thousands of individuals all stuck together, and they just move through the ocean, filter feeding. They don't hurt anybody, but still a little bit intense if it's your first time snorkeling or something, and you're like, what is this giant tube? Is it trash? No, it's a bunch of chordates, thousands and thousands of chordates all stuck together. So when they're all together like this, they're usually called salps. You can find all kinds of fun videos. Some of them with Attenborough talking about sea squirts is the other name for them. Tunicates, sea squirts, salps. Those are invertebrate chordates. All right, now I have a question for you. Here's the phylogeny of the monophyletic clade Animalia. You know, chordates are up there and invertebrates are just the flamingo. You've learned a lot in the last like lecture and a half, kind of a whole lot, probably too much about this diversity. There's me circling invertebrates. Talk to your neighbors. All right, how we describe invertebrates? Paraphyletic, right? So dumb. So it's not actually that dumb if you're trying to make a point about vertebrates, but I always find that this is I'm just going to hammer you guys with this for the whole semester. It's always much more interesting biologically to talk about what vertebrates did rather than what everybody else doesn't do. I just think that's a more interesting conversation because otherwise you have to sit there and struggle to explain what a sponge has in common with an octopus and a damselfly. It's just like, they don't have a backbone. What if you just say these ones have backbones? Anyway, so there's our vertebrates. Finally, though, we're here. We've arrived. It's done. No more squishy stuff. Well, there's going to be squishy stuff, but it'll be a different kind of squishy stuff. So here's the phylogeny we're going to have in our class. This is what you guys are going to see this about a million times as we walk through stuff. This is the phylogeny of what I selected to be somewhat representative for the points we're going to make in this class. A phylogeny of the living big clades of vertebrates. There it is. By yourself, trace some relationships in this phylogeny. Who's related to who? What did you already know? What are you surprised by? Just by yourself for seriously a minute here. I'm gonna walk right in the room. You guys can see it's all live. All right, talk to your neighbors, please. Talk to people around you. What are you thinking about, observing, questions, anything at all?
Very close, yeah.
All right, what kind of things are we talking about? What questions might we have? Yeah,
One thing like we discussed, like I brought up, is that it seems like it's interesting to see how mammals and everything is came from aqueous, but then it's like almost gradual, like amphibians, and then like furry stuff, and then back to like scaly reptile. And bird.
okay, so there's so many observations in there. Anybody want to take one of those? Did everybody hear? So what, can you say what your first point about, you said aqueous, what you meant?
Everything like to shares a common ancestor with things that are coming from water or in water.
Well, or at least, you know, I will tell you that I would stake everything on this phylogeny being correct. But you would then still take these lines that are just drawn on these cartoons and you're inferring if these all live in water and these all live in water, these all live in water, you're inferring these common ancestors are living in the water. People agree with that, disagree with that? I agree with it, just making clear what we're doing here. So you're noticing that like there's a moment of maybe leaving the water, but then these ones that do have fingies and toesies do love the water a lot. So that's interesting. And then what else? So what are, well, let's go around more. It's also, I just want to say it out loud. I know I've said it a bunch of times, but I'll say it out loud. If you're like, I don't know what that is, I don't know what that is, I don't know what that is, that's definitely fine. You're not supposed to know what all these things are. What other things? Yeah.
So like the relationship between like sawfish and raven fish and whatever seahorses are.
I had a lot of fun when I was like, I am gonna do the seahorse.
It's like, I think sawfish are representing the cartilaginous fish.
This,
Yeah.
is that, so this is not actually a sawfish, it's a paddlefish.
But
You don't know what those are, it's okay. Paddlefish, goldfish, seahorse.
is that like cartilaginous fish then, like sturgeon and things like that, or?
It is like sturgeon, which have some cartilage, but we're gonna get into, they're a little messy.
Okay.
Cartilaginous fish, like sharks and stingrays, are here. What other things? I heard conversation.
Everything loses like the jaw, development of a jaw. Pretty early on,
So everybody's got a jaw,
except.
except for some things. That's right. All right, so this is just to get you guys started. I'll say that, I don't know if I wasn't gonna do this, but I'm just gonna do it just in case. This is called a ratfish or chimera. This is a stingray. That's a paddlefish, a goldfish, seahorse, a salamander, a frog, a fox, a possum, a gecko, a snake, a turtle, a crocodile, a flamingo, a lungfish, a coelacanth, a hagfish, and a lamprey. That was way too much. You're not supposed to write that down. I just saying it out loud. So if you watch the recording, because you're going to see this about 1,000 times. Okay. Let's walk through what we know about how these things are related in the taxonomy of this phylogeny. This is going to be a lot right now, but we're going to spend the next 4 weeks going through it. So don't worry. Oh, before actually we do that, I want to make the point. A couple weeks ago, it was really easy for you guys to be like, I know what a mammal is. And then you guys came up with a bunch of snake morphies for mammals like fur and milk, and they're warm-blooded. So you can see on this phylogeny of vertebrates, mammals, and the same thing was true for birds too, is a relatively small monophyletic clade with a bunch of things that set them apart from the other groups. And so you guys came up with those snake morphies on your own. And so mammals wasn't very hard for you guys to think of a bunch of them and tell me what they were. This is why it was sort of a struggle to do fishes. I'll never argue with somebody that the word fishes like it's dumb. Obviously, it's extremely useful out in the world. But as a biological phenomenon, this fish shares a common ancestor with us to the exclusion of all the others, and then this one, and then this clade, and then this clade, and then this clade. So fishes, they're absolutely paraphyletic, unless you do what I did at the beginning of this class on the intro slide. Humans are just a very derived kind of fish. I'm fine with that. All biologists that I know are fine with that. But most people are like, ah, you say that. So depends what you mean by fish. Okay, here's the phylogeny with the taxonomy we're going to learn. Now you can take notes on this because I personally think this is like, it's gonna seem like a lot, but I think these breaks are pretty easy. A well-resolved phylogeny always has two split points, a speciation event, two populations splitting into two species, splitting apart into two lineages, always has two splits. So for vertebrates, this is the node for vertebrates. Everything after this monophyletic, in this monophyletic clade is a vertebrate. So vertebrates split into two clades. Here's the common names. We're gonna do common names first. The jawless fishes and the jawed fishes. So that tells you a lot about what the synapomorphies are going to be as we go forward, right? Everything here has vertebrae. And then after that, jaws, no jaws is an interesting way to spread it up. Amongst the jawed fishes, there's cartilaginous fishes and bony fishes. So again, a little hint of what synapomorphies might show up. The bony fishes split into ray-finned fishes and lobe-finned fishes. So in each case, we got to split into two: jaws and jawless, cartilage and bone, ray fins, lobe fins. Of the lobe fin fishes, there's some groups, but the group that we're going to talk about the most of the lobe fin fish groups, of course, is the tetrapods, or the four-footed, the four-legged. You can think of it as the limbed lobe fin fishes. Within tetrapods, the split that happens, that's the most important to today's biodiversity, is between amphibians on one side and amniotes on the other side. You might know some of these words. We're going to go through all of them. If this is a lot all at once, I know. Of amniotes, the split is between mammals and reptiles. And then within reptiles, there's a bunch of interesting groups, but the one you guys probably know really well is birds. And that's where we would put birds there at the very end. So I hope that is a little bit clear. Like I said, we're about to spend quite a bit of time walking through all this, so don't worry. There's all the real names that I actually care about. So vertebrata instead of vertebrates, that's not so bad. And then cyclostomes and gnathostomes is what we call jawed or jawless vertebrates. Chondrichthyes and osteichthyes are cartilaginous and bony fishes. Sarcopactinop. Once we get up here, it's pretty easy, right? Amphibians became amphibia. Mammals became mammalia. Reptiles became reptilia. I feel like that's not too much of a study. So these early ones, I know are words you haven't seen probably. We're definitely gonna spend a lot of time on them, but that's the words we're really gonna be using. I'll intersperse back and forth, especially early on here. Today though, we're not gonna have a snake at the top of the slide all day. That's dumb. We're only talking about fish. So I've condensed all the tetrapods down to our old friend, the flamingo, and we will be hanging out here. This is the same tree, but condensed. The flamingo representing all the tetrapods. Vertebrata is a clade on this tree, and the most ancient split between vertebrates, which happened 500 million years ago, is between cyclostomes and gnathostomes. Gnathostomes are jawed mouths. Stome is mouth. You guys learned deuterostomy, second mouth for all of us deuterostomes. Gnathostomes are jawed mouth. And then over here is cyclostome, so a circular mouth. And so these fishes that we're about to talk about do not have jaws. They are jawless, the cyclostomes. Okay, there they are. Before we get into their specific diversity, I have to give you, of course, actual synapomorphies for our clade vertebrata. So these next bunch of slides we're gonna be walking through, it's gonna be like the clade and then some characters that the synapomorphies for that clade that I care about. What do you think the first synapomorphy for vertebrata is going to be? You guys are all getting A's, I can tell. So the vertebral column. So all chordates have a notochord, but only in vertebrates does there start to be, at least at first, cartilaginous structures on the top and bottom that wrap around the notochord. So this is an embryological shark right here, so a baby shark with, it's funny to say baby shark, sorry. With like these processes on top and bottom of the notochord when it's in an embryo. As that shark grows up, that notochord gets reduced, a cartilaginous centrum forms. There's that same kind of nucleus pulposus. That's the ancestral notochord that you have on the intervertebral disc. And you get these, at least in some animals, cartilaginous, in you it's bony, structure of the notochord into these segmented things. So instead of one long rod, there's these segments. And so the vertebral column, which has a ton of parts and a ton of anatomy, is absolutely, of course, a snapomorphy for vertebrates. Another very excellent vertebrate snapomorphy, tunicates and lancelets do not have a skull. So you guys think of your skull as bony. Of course, your skull is bony, but skulls form in cartilage first. You guys all know babies have like a soft spot. Their skull isn't formed all the way quite yet. They're still cartilaginous. So here's a lamprey, one of these jawless fishes. And here's a shark, so a gnathostomes, a jawed fish, just like you. And they have a encasing around the brain, something to protect the brain. That can be made out of cartilage or bone, but it's a skull around the brain. That is where the brain starts. And we're gonna actually talk about that here in a second. Or sorry, where the skull starts is around brain protection and senses. So here is the third character I want you to have for vertebrata. The brain itself becomes tripartite. It's not just a swollen bunch of nerves at the front and the head of the animal, like it is in some clades. In vertebrates, the brain starts to get structure. And the earliest kind of structure we see in the vertebrate brain is tripartite, so splitting up into three sort of like bumps, three lumps. So here's that notochord in this baby lamprey. Here's the nerve cord, which is another chordate snapomorphy. But in this lamprey, there's three big swellings in the anterior of the brain, anterior of the spinal cord that forms this brain. And those three lobes all correspond to different sensory structures. So you can imagine, of course, that like the way I'm chopping this up, we're talking about the shape of the brain, but then also the skull. These are both different, but related, of course, features of vertebrates. Those swellings in the vertebrate brain correspond to senses. The first one is the olfactory lobe, the middle one is the optic lobe, the posterior one is the otic lobe. Olfactory is like chemosensory and smelling. Optic lobe is visual, seeing things, eyeballs. And the otic lobe is vibrational, hearing. And so sensory structures, skull formation, brain development, these are all very integrated things. But these are kind of simple ways we can bust that up a little bit just to put on the tree in broad strokes where important things happen. Yeah.
So is the idea that the brain always forms in the head universal, or are any animals that form a brain with a different part?
You would definitely have to be very clear on what you mean by brain. Major like processing centers, especially for like sensory information, are almost always up in the brain. There's a lot of stories that you guys might have heard and different clades of organisms where like there's ganglia, there's like patches of nerves that like can integrate information that are like over here or over there. That's definitely true. But I don't know if we'd say brains. Brains are usually all about like master control, like a lot of the stuff that's like involuntary, like heart rhythm and things like that. They might have like a little like helping center in the leg somewhere in some organism, but for the most part, all of it's up there in the head. Yeah. So a feature for bilaterians, you guys will remember, was just like a head at all. So, you know, even a spider has a pile of neurons and its eyeballs in its mouth, all of them perfect. So this is kind of interesting things to talk about here. Did that answer your question?
Yeah.
All right. So there's our three characters now that we have for vertebrates. Cool. The first thing we're gonna do, finally now, 40 minutes in, we can talk about some biodiversity. We're gonna take a left at this vertebrata node and go to these jawless fishes. These are animals I bet you guys don't have too much exposure to because they're so weird, but they're really fun. So the first group of cyclostomes are called the hagfishes. Anybody know anything about hagfishes? You heard of it? How about this? Raise your hand if you've ever even heard of a hagfish. Oh, that's great. Good for you. I'm happy about that. So hagfishes are these usually pink and purple little dudes. They've got these like sensory antennae called barbels on the front of their faces. They don't really have eyeballs. Isn't that terrible? They live in the deep water. One thing that's great about hagfishes is that hagfish and lamprey do not have teeth. They also don't have bone. We're going to talk about teeth and bone and teeth and how they form in lab next week. So these are vertebrates, but they're not bony. Now, I think you will notice that this thing has some pretty terrifying looking teeth stuff on its rim of its mouth. It does not have a jaw, but has these sides of its mouth that go like this. It has these tooth structures. These tooth structures are keratinous, like your fingernails or hair or feathers. They're made of like a dermal skin-based protein structure that can get hard, this keratin structure, but it's not like teeth like your teeth. I love that picture. I think it's really upsetting. Hagfish are really fun because they don't have jaws. They slam their teeth into meat, and then they can do this thing where they tie themselves into an actual knot and then pull the knot across their actual real bodies. And that's how they generate tension and rip off meat of some food that they're eating. What do hagfish eat? What is their ecology? Hagfishes are usually very deep sea organisms. You're never really going to see one yourself, probably, unless it's dead or something. This is a nice photo of a whale fall. So a whale that died out in the ocean, and then its body sank after it died down into the black deep sea. And so all these whale bones are here, beautiful vertebrae, and there's hagfish all over it, and those hagfish are scavengers. Hagfish have an extremely good sense of smell with these like sensory antennae. So they'll just be in the deep water doing nothing, and then when they smell something, they all congregate and swarm all over it, and they strip the flesh off the dead animals with these keratinous teeth and tying themselves into knots, just for fun. Here's a terrible gif of them eating a tuna, and you can see one tying itself into a knot. The only fins they have are caudal fins, right? Just the caudal fin, just the keratin teeth in quotes, tie themselves into a knot to eat it. In case you guys were planning on dying in the ocean, something to think about. The other fact about hagfish, I'm sure you guys know, maybe you know, is their slime. So they have, there's this mouth, so they take water into their mouth and the water comes out right here. So they have internal gills where they breathe with, but all along their body, they have these slime sacs, which are something that no other vertebrates really have. A lot of vertebrates in the oceans can produce mucus. That's absolutely true, keep themselves protected in some ways from seawater and from infection. But hagfish have it as like an anti-predatory defense. So here's this fisherman in Japan with a bunch of hagfish in there, and all he has to do is reach in, and they release these proteins from their bodies, and these proteins immediately react with the seawater to like uncoil and become this absolutely terribly sticky, stretchy slime. And so there's a bunch of hagfish. There's this dude with his hand covered in slime. I think it's better for you guys to see it in action. So I have this is some deep sea footage of bait that's been put out, and some hagfish are coming to the bait, and then this shark comes along, and the shark is going to eat one of the hagfish. It thinks. And so now that shark has its whole throat, mouth, and gills full of slime, and it's like, and it like leaves the hagfish alone. Hagfish is fine. Shark has to go deal with this. There's a lot of gifs you can see of this now because it's become a thing that a lot of different like scientific organizations try to do. There's really good footage of grouper, which is a kind of like bony fish, and they have such big gill things that when this is choking on the slime, there's just slime everywhere. So they protect themselves, even though they're just gross meat tubes with no eyeballs. Hagfish, everybody. A vertebrate just like you. The other kind of cyclostome, so jawless vertebrate that's living today, are the lampreys. And so there's about 38 species of lamprey today. Lampreys do have eyeballs, followed by these holes here. These holes are their actual gill openings. So water goes in their mouth, out their gills. So they're breathing in a very fishy way, respiring, taking oxygen from the water. And they also have a nostril where that water goes in. So they do have an eyeball. Anybody know lampreys or seen lampreys? We get them up into Idaho because they go up the rivers, they go up the Columbia. So they will be up in our waters a little bit. There's a lamprey's mouth. So there's the oral disc of the lamprey that you can't see quite here, and this guy can. Here's what it looks like on the inside. So just like the hagfish, the lampreys have teeth. Those teeth are not really teeth, they're made out of keratin. They certainly function as teeth. And so there is a disc here that the lamprey uses to suction onto things, and it can move those teeth a little bit. But it also has on this piston-like tongue structure. It's not homologous to your tongue. It's its own kind of thing. Another set of teeth that can go like this on the tongue and kind of come out that main hole. I did find a bunch of gifts, but I was like, too gross. I didn't put them on, but you guys can Google it if you want to see this like gnarly tongue come out. Does anybody know what they do, what their ecology is?
Yeah.
Yeah.
They like latch on and dig in so they don't come off, and then they use their tongue to like make whatever they're latching up bleed.
So here's a picture of a trout that somebody caught, and that's a lamprey wound. So for a long time, that trout had a lamprey just like latched onto it. And so they're not killing, they're just like creating a hole, like a scab that never can heal. They also have anticoagulants in their saliva that they put down onto the fish. And so they just sit there and they're just drinking blood and juices all the time. Their digestive system is basically a straight line because they're only eating blood and fluids. So their body just says, thank you, and absorbs it. There's no digestion really in lamprey. But what's really cool is not all lampreys are parasitic like this. And the ones that are only parasitic as adults. Baby lamprey do what Amphioxus does, do what cephalochordate invertebrates do. As babies, they put their butts in the sand, they can breathe through their gills, and they filter feed. So a lot of baby lampreys are filter feeders, and then as they become adults, they become these parasitic eel-looking things, but they're absolutely not eels, they are their own things, lampreys. Just like, lampreys live in the oceans and they live in fresh water, and like I said, not all of them are parasites. There are plenty of lampreys that just like do normal fishy things. One thing that's cool about them though, is that they do have this anadromous lifestyle. So anadromous means you like are born in a river or a lake, and then you grow up there a little bit and you go out to sea and you really grow up out in the ocean. So salmon are easily the most famous animals that have this life cycle. And lamprey have the same life cycle where they'll live their lives out in the ocean. You can see they can live for quite a long time, but then they spend their baby years in rivers and streams. There are also organisms, things like trout and other kinds of lamprey that do the same thing with rivers and big lakes. So they don't necessarily have to go to the ocean, but like moving water versus big open bodies of water. So lampreys have a pretty cool ecology. They do a lot of interesting stuff. They are very ancient organisms. This slide I'm showing you guys is definitely a little bit much. This is a picture from a paleontology article about the evolution of hagfish and the evolution of lamprey. All of geological time is running right here on the bottom. So this is you and me, 0 million years ago. Here's 100 million years ago. Here's 500 million years ago. I put a blue dot on the origin of vertebrates. So there's vertebrata. And then this line, and then this black bar represents the fossils we have, are all the gnathostomes, the vertebrates with jaws. So you and me are here, gnathostomes. This was a paper that came out a couple years ago, and like all the paleo people like me got so excited. And it was making a point that our fossil record of lamprey and hagfish is pretty terrible. So there's all the living hagfish, and they have their common ancestor here. And so that we call this the crown hagfishes. You guys are going to hear crown a little bit from me, crown and stem. Crown has to do with like all the diversity that's alive right now on the planet versus the not crown, which we call the stem. So there's crown hagfishes, crown lampreys. They're all about that old. But there's fossils we have that let us know about like the evolution of the group before today's diversity showed up. So these are all animals, fossils we have that are stem lampreys. So fossils that are closer to lampreys than they are to anything else that's alive right now. The point I want you guys to take away from this is nothing about the details. It's the idea that we basically have no fossil lampreys for 500 million years, except for a few from this time period, and that's it. Fossil hagfish are even worse. 1, 2, there are 2 fossil hagfishes in 500 million years, and then all the living diversity we have today. Partly that is because they don't really have hard parts. They're little smushy things. They're vertebrates, but they don't make good fossils. I wanted to show you this because I just think it's incredible to know that we can use things like developmental biology and genetics to estimate divergences. We can use fossils as another line of evidence to talk about the evolutionary history of a group. And so the crown for cyclostomes, all the circle mouth animals, goes back this far. But the 2 groups that are actually alive right now only go back that far. And there's a whole lot of missing stuff in the fossil record. But those fossils do help us understand certain of the transformations. I just want you guys to really take it in because it's not true for the rest of vertebrates, but like these guys, oof, it's rough. Okay. So we just did a little crash course in cyclostomes. And that was our first big clade. So like I said, for the next 4 weeks, we're gonna end with birds. It's gonna take a while. If we turn right at vertebrata, we go to the jawed mouth vertebrates, the gnathostomes. I'm giving you 6 characters for Gnathostomata, and they're all good, don't worry. What do you think the first one's gonna be? So, all gnathostomes, all jawed vertebrates, of course, are characterized by jaws. And so you are seeing here on the right, 3 extremely different kinds of fishy organisms. This is a barracuda, or a bony fish. This is a basking shark, the humongous kind of shark, a cartilaginous fish. And then there's a fossil, one of these giant armored fishes from way back in the day. All of them have jaws. We actually are going to spend some time in lab talking about the evolution of jaws. What I want you guys to take away for today is that it is an incredible feat of like human intuition and science and ingenuity that has put together the actual mechanism for the evolution of jaws. Please take a look at this diagram. This is supposed to be, well, it's not supposed to be, it is a diagram of like the anterior part of a shark skeleton, so cartilaginous shark skeleton. This is that ancestral vertebrate skull with the olfactory, optic, and otic lobes in it. So it's a skull with a brain in there. And then here's the jaws with teeth. Here's all these things. Talk to your neighbors for a quick second about where the jaws fit in there, what they kind of look like, what you think might be happening here. That's how a shark's situation is.
Yeah.
All right, what are some, any kind of thoughts you have at all about this diagram on a shark's jaw structure? Yeah.
It looks like both of the jaws are separated, top part of the skull.
Oh, okay. So you mean like this green, you mean the green and the blue, look like they're different? Can you think of anything about that? What other things we'll talk about?
The mandibular arch is the first gill arch.
The first gill arch. There's amazing things you can read from hundreds of years ago. People with like a shark that they caught in the Mediterranean or whatever, and they're like, gosh, because when the shark's dead, it's just like gill, jaw. It's all the same shape and it's all the same thing. So that seems like it anyway. So for a long time, vertebrate anatomy, developmental biology, and paleontology, there has been thousands and thousands of pages written to understand where jaws came from. They're obviously incredibly important. Gnathostomes are hilariously diverse compared to the jawless fishes. I can tell you guys that in the fossil record, once jaws evolved, jawed fishes become the biggest, baddest things around, and still are the biggest, baddest things around. But where did jaws come from? So yeah, it does look like they might be involved with the gill structure. Remember, the lampreys have gills, the invertebrate chordates have gills, even the other deuterostomes have a pharynx where they filter water with slits in it. So gill structure is very ancient. And so did our clade, did the gnathostome clade turn some of those gill arches into jaws? But even if they did, These jaws are not obviously connected to the rest of what you guys think of as the skull. You're sitting here going, it's all one thing. I just call it my head. It's a lot of other stuff happening. Also, what are these things? Teeth. Where are these teeth coming from? There's no teeth back here. What are teeth? You have to always try to imagine, and I want you guys to be doing this kind of throughout the class. There's never a moment in evolution where something really truly comes out of nowhere. So maybe jaws are co-opted front gills. You guys have already seen, sorry, that was done. These animals are using, they don't have full jaws, but they have control over like their mouth. They have a mouth, they just don't have a jaw. So how could selection act on gilly kind of structures to make a jaw? We're going to talk about it in the lab. I'm not going to go too far into it right now, but you're absolutely right that some type of gill arch structure is thought to be involved. And so we can do all kinds of things. Like I said, we'll talk about it in the lab. I just wanted you guys to kind of see it. Skulls in early vertebrates are cartilaginous, and the gill arches, the structures of the gills, are also cartilaginous. And then those slits, which are very ancient, are just where water passes from the mouth out back into the world. And so what's really cool is we can talk about what we see in fossils of early fishes that start to have the teeniest, stupidest little jaws that are really delicate. And so it does seem like the anterior gill arches, we can make homologous statements like, if a baby lamprey is this thing, is this thing, that one, which is the important one, we can figure that kind of stuff out. And so the idea is, yes, that a couple of the gill arches evolved or co-opted to become the jaws. And then once you have jaws, selection can act on jaws, and you can become all kinds of other things. You can process food bigger than yourself. You can't eat something bigger than yourself if you don't have a way to process it. That hagfish can tie itself in knots, but it's still just ripping meat off the dead whale. It's not getting more. So this is like a huge event in vertebrate evolution. We'll talk about it in part of our lab on Monday. So that was one Gnathostome character. We got 5 more. One of them is a dermal skeleton. So dermal is like skin. You can think of it as like almost like an exoskeleton. Hard tissues around the body. Fishes have scales. You guys know this. Fishes have scales. Sharks have scales. So these are just 4 different kinds of fishy scales. You don't have to worry about the differences between them right now. We're definitely going to talk about this one, the placoid scales on sharks in lab. But that dermal skeleton, lampreys and hagfish don't have that. They have soft skin. Dermal skeleton is on all jawed vertebrates. Inside the mouths of those jawed vertebrates, at least the ones that are alive today, it's interesting, of course, when we talk about fossils, but at least the ones that are alive today, jawed vertebrates also have teeth. Teeth have a lot of extremely specific structure to them. They are made of multiple tissues like dentin, enamel. Where they form, you guys know teeth can be replaced or they can't be replaced. There's a lot of evolutionary biology that happens within teeth. Teeth are how you eat and form your trophic structure, all kinds of things are your trophic position. And so we know a lot about how teeth form. Something that's really interesting is that this is supposed to be showing you some embryology on the dermis of a shark. This little lump of cells, this dome, has dentin forming in the middle, and then these like lumpy cells out here on the outside are forming enamel. Sometimes a lump like this can become the scale on the outside of a shark. You guys probably know sharks are like rough. But that exact same little bud can also form what you would call a tooth. And so that dermal skeleton, that is a feature of all jawed vertebrates, and the teeth of jawed vertebrates definitely have something happening where they're like the same thing almost. And so here's how like a shark's teeth form in its jaw coming out of the skin. That's supposed to be a scale on the shark's skin, and here's the teeth in its jaw. So we're going to talk about that here in a little bit. But teeth are a feature of all gnathostomes. Similarly, we're staying with our hard tissues. All gnathostomes have a mineralized endoskeleton. So there's some mineral crystal component of their internal skeleton. So the bone's deep inside their bodies. Some of these animals, like today's sharks, are cartilaginous. They're mostly made of cartilage, but within that cartilage, there is crystalline structure. And today's sharks are sort of weirdos, and we will talk about that later as well. So special cartilage in sharks, and then of course you guys have bone. This is just representing bone here. So a mineralized endoskeleton is absolutely a feature of gnathostomes. So that's 4 so far: jaws, a dermal skeleton, teeth, a mineralized endoskeleton, the skeleton inside their body. The last 2 are very easy and very fun. All gnathostomes have 2 sets of paired fins. We talked about these really briefly yesterday, and some of you guys were like looking at the bony fishes I had for you and trying to label them. All of the gnathostomes have paired pectoral fins, so a set of fins up in the front. Here's this shark, here's this goldfish, they both have pectoral fins. And then the other character that all gnathostomes share is a pair of pelvic fins. So pelvic fins, pectoral fins on all gnathostomes. Dorsal fins too, but I just didn't include that. Okay, so we already did this. Those are the 6 characters for you guys to have for gnathostomes. Any questions on any of those? What's crazy about this is when we only look at the biodiversity of animals alive today, this little like line here, I only care about this because I'm a paleontologist, is like a couple 100 million years of time is right here. And there's so many fossils that help us understand. So sometimes I'm gonna give you guys like 1 million characters, and that's your cue to be like, show me all the details in between, because there's so many. Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna ask, in that time scale, are there examples of in-between type animals, things that don't have dermal skeleton?
There are plenty of, the order, is, like how about this, pectoral fins and the exoskeleton, the dermal skeleton are before the jaws. We know that for sure. Pelvic fins kind of come with the jaws. Teeth come after jaws. There's plenty of them that have jaws but don't have teeth in their jaws. So yes, if we have fossils involved, it's like, okay, we can see this all, but I can't go there. I can't. I teach one other class. Take that one. All right. So I just put all 6 of those characters there on the gnathostome tree, on the tree here for Gnathostomatus. You have 3 vertebrate characters, 6 gnathostome characters. I did not give you any cyclostome characters. I'm not too worried about it. A lot of good genetics and some like headache inducing anatomical stuff, which we're not going to bother with. So once we get into gnathostomes split into chondrichthyes, so cartilaginous fishes, and then this one here is osteichthyes or bony fishes, and all the rest of this tree is bony fishes. But for today, we're turning right here at chondrichthyes and going up into the cartilaginous fishes. There's only, there are 2 characters I want you guys to have that unite all of the chondrichthyan fishes, the cartilaginous fishes. The first is about their mineralized skeleton. All of you learned when you were probably in like 2nd grade or something that like sharks have a cartilage skeleton, they don't have bones. It's much more complicated than that. They certainly do have a skeleton that is not made of the bone, like you have bone. What they have is a cartilaginous skeleton that is mineralized in a different way. And so they have these like crystals in their bodies, in their skeletons, called prismatic calcified cartilage that gives their cartilage a lot of structure. It's very tough. It's not smushy like your ear or your nose, which is also cartilage. It's very rigid. So the prismatic calcified cartilage is a very specific crystalline kind of cartilage. We're going to talk about it in the lab. And all the living cartilaginous fishes have this specific kind of cartilage. So even if you find a fossil, you can look at it under a microscope and see if it has this kind of cartilage or not. So that's that. The other character that's just too much fun for all cartilaginous fishes is called claspers. And so what you're looking at here are 2 little sharks. And this is their pelvic fins. This is like they caught a little shark and now you're looking at the underside of the little sharks. This is a female. Those are her pelvic fins. This is a male. These are his pelvic fins. And he's got these extensions off the back of his pelvic fins. Those are called claspers. Here's 2 little skates. So things that kind of look like stingrays maybe. So there's the eyeballs, there's their spine. Here's a female skate, here's a male skate. And you can see he's got these long things sticking off his pelvic fins that are called claspers. Anybody know anything about claspers? They clasp, love that. Claspers are used for internal fertilization. all chondrichthyans, all of them have internal fertilization. There's no shark scooping out her nest on the bottom of the ocean and squirting her eggs into it, and then he puts sperm on them. There's internal fertilization. So claspers function a lot like a penis, but they aren't. There's a groove on the side. Sharks, rays, they all do this thing. Females usually have really tough, we're going to talk about it in reproduction week, really tough pectoral fins, because the males will like bite onto their fin to hold on and then wrap themselves around her, and one of their pelvic fins will curl and go inside her body. And then there's a groove on the inside of the clasper, and he releases sperm that go up it's still exposed to the seawater, up that like chute into her body. And so internal fertilization happens in all chondrichthyans. Not all of them, but quite a lot of them have live babies that pop out. Not all of them lay eggs. So some of these females, their part of this reproductive side is that once they have those internally fertilized eggs, there's a ton of chondrichthyans that keep them inside and then have live birth, which is really interesting. And of course, there's a lot of diversity to what we mean by live birth. A few of them actually do have a completely real and valid analog to like the placenta that we mammals have. Just super, super interesting. Claspers and prismatic calcified cartilage. Those are your chondrichthyan characters. So these two animals here are both chondrichthyans. They both have the prismatic calcified cartilage. They both have the claspers. They both have all 6 of these things. They both have all 3 of these things. And as we go back and back and back, I'm sure you guys are getting that. Okay. Within chondrichthyes, there's 2 major groups, although one is hilariously much more diverse than the other. The first group of chondrichthyans are these little guys. They have a ton of names. Sometimes they're called ratfish or chimera or rabbitfish. Holocephalans is another name for them, a proper scientific name for them. Are these familiar to anybody? Have you guys ever seen these before? They're wonderful. You dissected one? Yeah, we've got some. We'll probably look at some in lab for sure. So they're sometimes called ratfish or rabbitfish. Chimera, because it looks like there are a bunch of different animals. This one is one of the most common ones. Like if you go to like Washington or British Columbia, like Puget Sound is full of this species. They're called rabbitfish because they kind of look like rabbits in their face with those big eyes and kind of vertical. Also, the character that unites all these things, there's a million of them, but the one I care for you to know is they have these tooth plates. They don't replace their teeth. They just have a giant single tooth that just kind of grows. And so front on, there's the nostrils, there's the mouth, there's their buck tooth plate. This is why these things are called rabbit fishes. There's actually 3 families, almost 50 species of these. And so some of them are deep, deep ocean specialists. This one's got this really long nose, which is really interesting. And then pretty great name, ghost sharks for some of the species have these like long sensory noses. Something we're going to talk about when we talk about these fishes more and talk about senses is that all these chondrichthyans have really intense electroreception and senses of smell. So we'll talk about that. The other thing I really like about them is that they usually swim with their pectoral fins. Like they swim like this. You can see it in the video. Some of them are called ratfishes because their tail looks kind of like a rat tail. It's just long and thin. Anyway, I think they're great. Not so diverse today, 50 some species, but they have an excellent fossil record. All you Idaho people can be excited that the buzzsaw shark, Helicoprion, and the best fossils of Helicoprion were about 300 million years ago. They all come from Idaho. Many, the biggest collection in the world is from Idaho. It's down at the museum here on the quad. Helicoprion, if you haven't seen it, has this giant spiral of teeth that looks like a circular saw in its mouth. Here's the face of Helicoprion. Helicoprion is Idaho's pride and joy. And Helicoprion is called the buzzsaw shark, but it is absolutely not a shark. It is on the line to holocephalians. It is a stem holocephalian. So all those cute ratfish are the living cousins of scary things like the buzzsaw shark. Idaho people usually know about the buzzsaw shark. The teeth all grow in this big circle, which is really crazy. We'll talk about tooth replacement maybe later. For a long time, paleontologists didn't know what to do with this because the only fossils they got were the buzzsaw. Like they don't have the face with the eyeballs, they don't have the tail. They just have the part that's hard. Everything else is cartilage. And so all they had was the buzzsaw. And so this is a really fun mural that somebody made of all the different places for the last 150 years people thought the buzzsaw might go, including like on the nose, on the tail, on the dorsal fin. Maybe there's 4, this illustration, there's 4 buzzsaws. Like every shark's got 4, that's kind of sweet. But actually, Idaho fossils are the ones that helped us understand where the buzzsaw fits into the cartilage of the lower jaw and against the cartilage of the upper jaw. So this is what helicoprion looks like. That's all Idaho stuff. I also like to point out to people that like helicoprion looks insane, and of course it is insane, but there's tons of other shark things like it. And so this is another one called Adestus that has teeth like this, also known from Idaho. So of course, in the fossil record, we have a lot of intermediates to show us how you'd eventually get to like the circle of teeth. Isn't that a nightmare? Holocephalans used to be really, really diverse. If you go to like dinosaurs and then go another 100 million years back, there's tons of them everywhere and they're doing all kinds of cool stuff. Anyway, there's some freaky science. We're not going to worry about it. So that was the holocephalans. So here's our chondrichthyes, and these are the holocephalans. The other group of chondrichthyans is over here, and it's the big one you guys already know about quite a bit. I'm only giving you 3 characters for this group. Tooth files. So this group is things like sharks and stingrays. And so what a tooth file is that this tooth, which a shark might be using to bite food, of course has a replacement tooth coming up. A lot of animals that have teeth, they're a replacement of teeth. That's a feature that all gnathostomes share. But sharks and rays have these like ready to go teeth already deep into their gums. So if you see a shark with its mouth open, you might only see 1 or 2 of these, but in a line, in file, are tons of other teeth that are already fully formed, and they'll pop out once it's time. Shark teeth are like not hard to find on beaches, either from living animals or as fossils, because sharks grow their teeth, and so do rays. This is the mouth of a ray, so a spotted eagle ray, so like Mr. Ray from Nemo, sings all the songs. Here's the mouth. The teeth are like 2 slices of pavement. Each one of these is like a little hexagon that makes these bigger tooth structures. And so rays usually are like crushing predators. They eat like clams and crabs. So they aren't grabbing a meaty fish with a spiky tooth. They're using their teeth to like crunch through hard shells. But the ray also has these teeth in waiting that are ready to go, these tooth files. Another feature of this group is something that you guys noticed when I showed you the jaw picture of the shark, skull mobility. And I forgot to put the technical word in those parentheses, which is sort of funny. Maybe I won't. Skull mobility. So the original vertebrate skull, made out of cartilage, has a name, the chondrocranium, the cartilage cranium. But then the jaws of early jawed animals are separate from this. They are not necessarily fused to this. They're connected, but they're not one unit. And so this upper cartilage, which in sharks is called the pallida quadrate, this lower jaw, this actual element is called the Meckel's cartilage. They both form the jaws. They both have teeth on them, but they are loose to each other and loose to like the brain and the eyes. You guys kind of already know about this because I'm sure you've seen pictures. Here's a great white shark swimming around, being chill. Anytime a great white shark does something cool for Shark Week, it looks like this. So you can see the pallida quadrate dropping down from the actual skull where the nose and the eyes are. This is nice and smooth, swimming around, chilled out, goes for the bite, it can like drop that cartilage down. So go for a more engulfing bite. So this is what you see from your boat and on your TV, but most of the time being chill. So that skull mobility, I'll put that word in when I put the slides on Moodle. A great example of this is in this animal called the goblin shark. This is a pretty big deep sea shark that has one of the most extreme examples of a loose attachment between the brain case and the upper jaw. Do you love it? You can tell that fish is a prop. So not only do those teeth help you grab onto things, but so many vertebrates feeding in the oceans, other animals do, but so many vertebrates feeding in the oceans feed by a kind of suction feeding. Having a jaw lets you create negative space. If you drop your jaw, all of a sudden the water floods into your mouth. So suction feeding, and then if you have teeth to help you grip a thing, really easy to see how adaptations of early vertebrates that are trying to bring water into their mouth to go across their gills just for breathing purposes start to be able to do interesting stuff. The other feature, sorry, it's so boring, for this clade that I want you to have is called ceratotrichia. And so what that is on the pelvic fins, on the pectoral fins, on the tail fins, you have these structures made out of cartilage in these animals. We're going to talk about these in lab. These structures at the base of the fin, but then the actual shape of the fin, the rods that support the shape of the fin, and the fin shape is a very ecologically important thing. Fast sharks, bottom dwelling sharks, the shape of the fin is determined by these structures, which are called ceratotrichia. They're actually a kind of keratin. So a shark's fin is very rigid. There's not a lot of sharks that are bending the actual structure of their fin. They really can't. They're almost like hard triangular shapes. When a shark's bending its tail, there's a million of these things, and the bending is happening kind of like in this plane between them, not bending it back on itself. So ceratotrichia are only in these animals called elasmobranchs. It's my bad I didn't put that on the chart. I should have put that here. All of these sharks and rays are called elasmobranchs, and the three characters I just gave you, tooth files, skull mobility, and ceratotrichia for their fin structure. These are all features of these animals called elasmobranchs. So that's my bad, I need to fix that. So now, what time do we have? Okay, good. So I'm gonna give you guys a little bit of an elasmobranch diversity. There's two big clades of elasmobranchs. The first are called the batoids, which is like one of the best names. The batoids are the things that are like rays. So there's lots of diversity here, 304 kinds of skates, 252 kinds of rays. There's three orders. So these are called skates. These are called torpedo rays. Torpedo rays are some of the only elasmobranchs that routinely live in fresh water in the Amazon. There's tons of like freshwater stingrays. They're all torpedo rays. Torpedo rays are also pretty electric. A lot of them use electricity to kill and stun prey or defend themselves. Some torpedo rays in the Amazon are particularly spooky because they just like float in the water at night, and then if they feel a fish go underneath them, they just like go like this with their flaps and like electrocuted. It's really cool, really interesting. Sawfish, which we brought up a while ago, are these really awesome, you can see very sharky looking animals. Almost all of these organisms have their mouth on the bottom of their bodies. The gills are back here on the bottom of their bodies. And then this long sensory structure in a sawfish. Sawfish are a really sad thing because they're very, very, very endangered. There's like not that many species, especially of the big ones. And they're really, really endangered. Florida is one of the only places they're decently well protected, and still it's pretty rough. They were harvested for a long time because everybody wants their noses as like these cool curiosities. We have one at the museum. I'll show it to you. So we're not innocent. The most diverse group of batoids, though, are things like stingrays, manta rays, all kinds of really cool ecology in this group. We will talk about them a lot as we go through class. The other group of elasmobranchs that like Godoy are the sharks. So sharks are in this group called Selachii. You don't have to know Selachii. And there's a lot of shark diversity. There's one clade that has these weirdos in it. So you can see decent species, 25 species, 10 species, 164 species. This thing's called the rough angular shark. I think it's great because of its shape, and its face is very full of character. These things are called saw sharks. They also have a really, really, really long nose that's covered with little spikes and sensory structures. Sharks have very good electroreception. So this is an animal that sits on the bottom and then swims around and see if somebody makes a mistake down in the mud and then parks their mouth over it and sucks it out. Angel sharks are these big sharks here. You can see pectoral fin, pelvic fin, can't see the other one. Dorsal way back here, caudal fin. Angel sharks look like angels, some people say. They're scary because they sit at the bottom and just wait, and somebody swims over top of them and they go and suck them down. Probably when you guys think of sharks, though, you think of members of the other clade of sharks, which has these 5 orders in it. So the most sharks are in this order here. So this is where you're going to get things like tiger shark, bull sharks, hammerhead sharks. A lot of your things I'm going to call sharky sharks that you're scared of when you go surfing or whatever. Lamniforms are much less diverse, but these are some of the really, really big predators. So things like great white sharks, this is a mako shark, are in these lamniform groups. But then you can see, once you get past these two, everybody else, I hope to you guys, looks really interesting and kind of exciting. Hexacanthoformes are these like really deep sea sharks that are super ancient. Look at their tooth files, like completely exposed. You can see like all the teeth all at once. They don't have the dignity to have their gums covering up their teeth. Erectolobiformes are super diverse. So you guys probably know the biggest fish in the world is the whale shark, this gigantic blue thing that filter feeds. The biggest fish in the world is a whale shark. This is a wobbegong, which is in the same group as the whale shark. It's got all these stupid little fringy things around its body. It's totally camouflaged. It lives on the reef and waits for things. A lot of really cool morphological diversity amongst sharks. Giving you guys a little bit of a heads up. These are Googleable words for you, or Wikipedia words for you if you want to. When I talk about sharks, and this is where it's going to get hard. So for the next few weeks, when we get into like these different clades, there's a million things I want to tell you, but we have to be careful because of time. So usually when you guys think of sharks, people think of these three species. There's another two that some people talk about, and they're usually called the scary ones because if there's a human fatality, they're probably involved. I always like to put a little asterisk on this, and like, of course, sharks need to be respected and need to keep danger, be aware of sharks in the situation. But sharks attack in such different ways. This is the one that Jaws is, right? The great white shark is what you always see. And this is the one that everybody who's afraid of is afraid of. But great white sharks actually eat almost no people. They eat very few people, but they're very much responsible for most of the deaths because they come up and they take a bite and they go, ooh, whoops, never mind. But that's bad because you're 50 yards out to sea and you don't have a leg anymore, and so you bleed out. So great white sharks might kill you, but I just think there's like that little asterisk as you're sitting there being like, oh God, it's like, well, I didn't mean it. These two, on the other hand, bull sharks and tiger sharks are notorious. They actually do, if they attack somebody, mean it. And so these ones are the ones that like, they get caught, they cut their stomachs open, there's like license plates and tires and all kinds of stuff. Like these are ravenous animals, but it's also, of course, really amazing that for the most part, for most of their lives, most of these animals in clear water don't really pose a danger to humans. You can see them be really interested, but like wary of people. Of course, there's always an asterisk and all that, especially for tiger sharks. Whenever I scuba dive, this is always the one that I'm like, I don't want to see that. Anyway, the scary ones, a lamniform and two in that other group.
What were the other two that you mentioned?
Oceanic white-tip sharks, which is the one that had the pelvic fin, pectoral fin one, they have like a really high body count. And a lot of that is from World War II when ships would go down in the Pacific and then there's just like a bunch of dudes in the water and those sharks are open ocean predators. And it was all military. So it's like documented that all these people got killed or bitten or eaten by white-tip sharks. And it's like super unfair because like if you're at the beach, that shark is 600 miles out to the ocean. It's like, don't worry about it. But their body counts. Anyway. Oh gosh. I'm forgetting. No, hammerheads can be big and they can be get damaged. I want to say something before we end. I just want to say besides the man-eaters, there's so many fun sharks. So here's that angular rough shark in the water. I'll just leave it at that. Do you guys know the cookie cutter shark? The cookie cutter shark has an upper jaw like this and a lower jaw like this. It's not a big shark. It's about this big. It's kind of, you can think of it as a parasite. It goes up to other sharks and dolphins and things. It swims up to them, goes like this, and basically like cores like 3 inches of flesh out of their side, but it doesn't kill them. So you'll see dolphins with like circular scars. That's the cookie cutter shark taking one bite. The Greenland shark, we're going to talk about later in class. It is an Arctic shark that lives like under the ice in the Arctic Ocean. They can be humongously big. And the cool thing about Greenland sharks is we just learned a few years ago that they can be very, very old. And the oldest Greenland sharks that are alive right now are more than 400 years old, which is outrageous to imagine that animal is 400 years old. So Greenland sharks have all kinds of interesting things. And then finally, like, how do you not love thresher sharks? They pose no danger to you. They whip stuff with their tails. And they do this thing that usually only dolphins and whales do, which is called breaching, where they jump a lot. How great is that? All right, we'll stop there. I'll leave you with this slide, but we won't talk about it. I'll leave you with this too. There's a lot of filter feeding among the giant elasmobranchs. Filter feeding, filter feeding.